All right, welcome back to our season review. It's been one of the shortest seasons we've had, but it seems like it's gone forever this season. We're here as always with Bruno. Bruno, that's the winner.
Beautiful season, fantastic season without its dramas through and through. But yeah, there were periods where you'd miss it because international break would hit, and you'd been so used to games being going non-stop the whole time, and then it just, the last month it's been dead for me because it's been wrapped up, competition's over. But until match day 38, it was still anyone's contest for Champions League and relegation and everything in between.
Yeah, I found it funny because as soon as Inter lost to Juventus, it pretty much meant season over for Lazio as well. We couldn't really go up, we couldn't go down, and it was almost like thank God. It's been such such a long season. It just seems like it's gone forever. Just with injuries and COVIDs and back-to-back games. Like it just seems like it was so intense. So with Champions League being so close, the run-in, we'll speak about that later. But a lot of teams were there right to the end. So it was just pressure every game to maintain a certain high level. And for my club, I'm just glad it's over.
Oh, look, it's been a very interesting season in the sense that Euros were pushed back from last year due to COVID. And then you had Inter, who had the shortest preseason of all teams, starting off as favourites, and then it didn't go the way the script anticipated. And I guess like everything, you saw you went to champions in AC Milan take it out, but you see it in the stock market, you see it in the housing market. There was a correction mid-season, and Milan just dropped off the face of the game for a fair bit there. And you know what? They're leading, and they almost missed out on Champions League. That's how tight it was. It was anyone's game at the end, but overall, there's a lot to talk about. A lot of news. You had the Super League, which disrupted everything in the last 10 games or so. And then, Champions League was a disaster for all of Italy. And even Europa. So there's a lot to talk about. Pending removals, big issues at AC Milan at the moment, which as an Inter fan you like to see. But you know what? Your most expensive player, you're letting go for free. So we'll talk about that as well. Juventus and the Ronaldo saga. But overall, highly entertaining season. I don't think we've seen so many goals. I don't think we've seen so many games so frequently, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it was a great prelude to the season we're probably going to experience at the end of the next season, where World Cup comes smack bang in the middle of December. So it'll be interesting, but overall, as an Interista, I am over the moon. We finally got number 19, and hoping to get that second star on our badge next year.
Yeah, well, as things go, they're looking fairly strong. If and big if their financial troubles are over and they can maintain their roster. Questions over the coach actually re-signing. So there's a lot to get through with that. I probably wanted to start. We've got MVPs that are going to be awarded, and I wanted to start with the coaches, because I thought that Stroppa for Crotone was definitely the worst coach for me. I thought he was the worst coach. He was put in a bad situation where there was a cluster of games and he didn't have much time to sort of react, I guess. But he absolutely done nothing. By the time that Christmas come, that team was already relegated. Not officially, but they were never going to catch up. So for me, he's probably the worst coach. But for me, the MVP would be Italiano. I thought that Spezia played like they had an extra two players on the field. They just gave no one any space. They were super strong. The way they transitioned from defense to attack was super fast, and I think that a lot of teams with a small budget should take a look at how you win games, because it wasn't like they were dull. They weren't dull. There was high pressure, and I think Spezia were the surprise packet of the season. They definitely surprised me, and I'm not sure if Italiano is staying, but if he is staying there, they could even get in Europa League next year.
Look, I wouldn't go as far as Europa League, but the fact that they did stay in there was pretty good. But then you look at the likes of the Parma coach, D'Aversa. He came last. He came last when you've got the likes of Crotone and you've got the likes of Benevento and Spezia in the league, and I just think he just didn't know what to do with the team. And Parma, they got relegated. They didn't get relegated. They got absolutely belted down. I think it was Serie A, and they just came straight back up. And just to see them go back down doesn't really help. Look, Italiano did well. He got promoted and held his position, but at the same time, they only finished 6 points above relegation. We're talking about how tight the battle was at the top for Champions League. The battle was just as tight down the bottom for relegation. You look at it. I think Benevento finished on 33 points, and then you had Torino on 37 with Cagliari, and then Spezia on 39. So effectively, there's two results that could have gone the opposite way and would change the scope of things. But I do feel, look, MVP, you can't stray away from the winning club. But in saying that, Conte had everything he needed to win the Scudetto. Whereas Pioli, on the other hand, had what was in front of him. And I think out of the top managers, so I'm talking from Inter down to Roma, I think out of the top managers, Pioli probably surprised the most, because only a Milan fan would have said they predict Milan to win this. And going into Winter Champions, you didn't expect where they were going to be. And I think it shocked everyone. And you put it down to Pioli. And when you've got a striker like Ibra firing on all cylinders, that's just so inconsistently injured, it changes everything. Now, you take Big Rom out of Inter. Do we win the title? No, we don't. But we were fortunate enough. But so I'd probably give him MVP, only because he did the job with the tools he had. My worst coach, although I did mention Parma, would have to be Fonseca. He just did not do anything. He had what was needed.
Was sacked early on in the season. Once they got the new management, they made it pretty clear that they didn't want him. So he was actually,
when you're fighting for when you know you got the sack. If I know I'm about to lose my job, I'm going to perform as good as possible because I want the next employer to want to hire me. I just feel he lost all motivation, and as a professional, and you see it day in and day out. Nainggolan for Inter, he knew he was going to Cagliari in the middle part of the season, but he still performed week in and week out when he did get on that pitch for Inter, and he played well. But Fonseca just gave up, and I don't think that was fair on Roma and their fans. As a Lazio fan, I'm sure you loved it, but I just think, if you're looking at the top teams, I feel you can't be so immature when it comes to something along those lines. But two very different MVPs from you to me.
Well, I pick Spezia because I like the way they play. But you mentioned Parma, and I thought that Parma and Spezia were by far the worst two clubs hit by COVID. And I actually believe that Parma would not have went down if it wasn't for COVID. Their list just seemed to go on and on and on. Same with Spezia. Like the page was always full of COVID injuries. Very unsettling for a team. It can come at a really bad time where you're copping like 4 games. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the times with a big bulk of players out, and that's Spezia and Parma for me were the 2 worst hit teams, and that's why I think that Parma was super unlucky, and I think Spezia really did well with the troops they had, because this is the whole thing. Benevento actually spent a lot of money on that team. When they got promoted, they actually bought quite a few players. And mate, the president was not happy when they got relegated. He made them catch the bus. I think it was a 9-hour, bus trip to. Yeah, it was. So that's why when you got pretty much the worst talent in the league with probably Crotone, and you stay up. And not only you stay up, but you actually put in good performances. And I know when they played Lazio, Lazio had 2 shots on goal for 2 goals. It was the whole game was all Spezia. Lazio had absolutely nothing. And if you actually put a Luis Alberto and a Ciro Immobile in that team, then they're going to be a lot more higher up the table with the way that they've been coached. So that's why.
Yeah, look, I think this season really separated the boys from the men, and I say that in the sense of a well-managed club to the poorly managed clubs. And I'm not saying that the lower teams were poorly managed, but they clearly didn't have the ability to keep up with the schedule at hand. And you know what? I think the leagues throughout Europe really enjoyed the high volumes of fixtures because the fans were loving it. By the time they got over one game, there's another game to go. And it wasn't like, you know what, we're getting over this game and the next game's poor. It was good game after good game, and the scheduling was something done well. But I feel the consistency and the frequency of games, you would see teams like Parma and Benevento and Crotone and Torino even just drop off the face of the planet because they could not compete for 2 weeks straight playing 4 or 5 games.
But the whole thing is that Lazio were exactly the same, because Lazio struggled in that first half of the season when playing back-to-back games. And I think majority of teams did. If you have a look at even Juventus were pretty far off the pack. It was only once the new year came in and the season got a little bit more normal that Lazio actually went on a record home winning run where they'd previously lost about like 6 home games. They struggled really bad and they couldn't cope. And this is the whole COVID sort of first half of the season where these teams, Lazio's, very, very thin with their squad. So we had to compete in Champions League and then we had to compete in the league, and back-to-back high-pressure games. They couldn't do it. And the little clubs just couldn't do it either. And this is why, like, a lot of clubs were affected by COVID even without even having cases.
Yeah, well, you look at the Champions League squads. So Inter, Lazio, Juventus, and Atalanta. They were the most teams that they were the teams to play most frequently. So if we didn't have Champions League one week, we were playing the midweek Serie A fixture. So even Inter, up until the conclusion of Champions League, they weren't near the top. Milan had just broken away because they clearly prioritized. Milan clearly prioritized Scudetto. But once, like you said, once the dust settled and teams realized this is the norm, well, they got on with it. But yeah,
Well,
I think
once the turn of once the turn of the year happened, the season actually got back to normal where we had the week break. It wasn't as congested. And this is why AC Milan were fielding Tonali in the Europa League and still got through. They done what Lazio normally do. They fielded their second string team, so they were more fresher during that period. And that's why they had the lead. And that's what COVID did, because Inter were well off pace. No one even thought Inter were really going to actually challenge because they were so far behind. But then once the that particular turn happened, Milan copped injuries, and they barely won a game in the new year.
Yeah.
I think the first 9 games they won 1 game. And these are sort of patterns that we see with a COVID season, because Milan were actually, if they beat Lazio in Rome, they were going to set the record for most away wins. If Lazio won, they were breaking their own record of home wins in a row. And then you had, I think at the exact same time, because Lazio did win, the top 6 teams had never had that many points. So there was a lot of records that were going, that were going this season for a lot of goals, a lot of points, a lot of teams suffering, and that's why I think we had it so tight in the end, because particularly those Champions League teams, Lazio, Atalanta, we both lost to Sampdoria back-to-back weeks, because they had Champions League. And then what happened was, once they had a nice schedule, then it was a lot more easier for those teams to make up the points. And then all of a sudden, you've seen record points in the second half of the season.
Yeah, look, I think last season would have been classified as, a misfire, in the sense of momentum had just been taken away from the teams who had the momentum, and play had stopped for 3 months. And you know what? Lazio were neck and neck. Atalanta were way up there, and Inter was struggling at the point of when the season was stopped. Whereas I think moving into this season, teams were sort of, all right, well, this is how it's got to be. And you had teams like Benevento and Spezia who didn't mind getting belted by Inter, Lazio, whoever they were facing at that time, because then the week later they were facing a lower team and they would prioritize that game. So I think that also contributed to the record points held. But moving on, because we could talk about that all day. Where are we going to start? At the back or at the front?
Probably at the bottom.
All right, so you run with it. Let me know how we're going.
I don't have the table. So yeah, I think that Crotone, they just couldn't cope. There was too many games. They didn't have the talent. The coach just didn't change anything. By the time they were distraught, but it was too late. They're already relegated. Crotone, gone, deservedly so. Parma, like I said, I thought Parma were hard done by with COVID cases, and Benevento, if Lazio had beaten Torino, if they weren't already kicked out, if, those couple that, I think Chira hit the post against Torino, if that didn't happen, Benevento might have still been in and Torino might have dropped down. So I think out of the relegated teams, there's some close stories there. And I'm not sure that Parma really did deserve to. Well, they did because they didn't get the points, but I thought that without COVID, they would have probably still been up. So that's the relegation.
Parma had Parma only recorded 3 wins for the season. And that just really showed you where they were at. I think it was a 2-0 win to Roma, and they beat Genoa and they beat Hellas Verona. So they're the only 3 wins they got. But what really hurt them was the 11 draws, and they just couldn't get the wins. Whereas Crotone registered 6 wins this season. And what hurt Crotone, because Crotone is one of the very few southern clubs in the competition. Well, they were one of the very few southern clubs in the competition before they got relegated. And what hurt them was there were no fans. And I don't know if you remember. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when Crotone were last promoted to the Serie A. The last match day, they scored a goal to save them from relegation, and the players at the time were saying the fans were there. It was a home game. So they were really hurt by the fans not being there. Befittingly, I feel Benevento should have been replaced by Torino in the bottom half of the in the relegation zone, only because the caliber of Torino, they should not have been there to begin with, and they were just a terrible team all season. And Benevento and
that they had the 7th highest wage bill, Torino.
Yeah, well, Torino and Benevento they both registered only 7 wins out of 38. So in regards to 3 points, they were on par with each other. They had both won the same amount of games, but Benevento lost 19 and drew 12, whereas Torino drew 16, and I think that is the highest in the league. It is the highest in the league. Torino drew 16 games all season. So
Torino just didn't know how to win. They threw away so many wins early on.
They were up 2-0 against Inter in one fixture, and they bottled it, and I think they lost 3-2 or 4-2, something like that. But yeah.
They beat Lazio in the 90th minute 3-2 and lost 4-3.
Yeah, it was the story of Torino, but I think out of the rest of the teams, Cagliari, Spezia, and Udinese, Spezia was the surprise package, but Cagliari, Udinese, they performed where sort of on par. I think between 16th and 10th spot, the teams were really where they should be. Fiorentina, I feel, picked up the slack pretty much towards the back end of the season, where it really made a big impact on their final tally. The last game they drew with Crotone, but I think the back end of the season's where they made their money. Sampdoria was probably a surprise package for me, finishing in 9th, and Sassuolo, I do think they are in where they have been the last couple of seasons, that 7th, 6th spot. I think they're on the cusp of Europe, and with this new Conference League, it may be possible for them. But I do feel they performed quite well this season. They won the games they should have. And
I'm surprised, to be honest, with Sassuolo, that it doesn't even matter who the coach is there. They always seem to be that same team. You know, when Di Francesco was there, they were just as exciting and just as competitive and still in the same bracket where they finished. Like, there's something there in Sassuolo. They have something. I don't know if Berardi is, the key there, I guess. But every year they just seem to be. They have entertaining games. They're never a dull team, but they're always up there.
Yeah, and De Zerbi left to join Shakhtar to join Shakhtar and coach them. So it'll be very interesting. So there are a couple of coaches who can fill many boots. So there'll probably be another video because the news is constantly revolving. So we can't cover everything. But let's move to the top half of the table where you had your outright winners in Inter who won it with they won it with a few games to go, to be honest. And it wasn't surprising. Sassuolo drew 1-1 with them on the 2nd of May, and that was when it was wrapped up for Inter. Sassuolo drew with Atalanta with 4 games to go. So it was a month worth of fixtures, and Inter had it wrapped up. So they got to celebrate their title win, which honestly, in the last 10 to 12 games, looking at it was never in doubt. But as an Inter fan, you can never hope too much. The final standings was interesting. So between 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th was 2 points. You had Milan on 79, Atalanta and Juventus both on 78, and Napoli on 77. Come match day 38, it was AC versus Atalanta. Atalanta coming off a loss in the Coppa Italia, but they had their European position secured. Napoli were to face Hellas to qualify if they get the win, and Juventus had to win and rely on Milan or Napoli dropping points, which ended up happening. So the top 4 finished Milan, Atalanta, Juventus, with Inter winning the title. Not shocked with the results. I think we could have called that top 4 the start of the season, especially with the way AC Milan was finishing. But at the end of the day, the teams that are there in Champions League next year, after their performances, do they deserve to be there? That's the question that begs to be answered. Did they? Well, they clearly are there, and they deserve to be there because they got the right amount of points and they beat the right teams. But it wasn't as clear cut as what one would think.
A lot of people are upset that Gattuso got the sack at Napoli. He's officially signed with Fiorentina, but I think that Gattuso was too negative at the start of the season. The first half of the season, I thought they played too defensive. They let a lot of easy, probably games, and then in the second half, he started playing much more attacking football. And Napoli, like Lazio, Juventus, and Inter, they all started racking up big points in that second half of the season. But it was too little, too late. I thought Gattuso was too defensive at the start of the season. When you actually, there was on another Lazio podcast, they were talking about Gattuso going to Lazio, and they said that this is a downgrade because you got someone like Gattuso with the squad that Napoli have, with someone like Mertens technically on the bench, you actually can't qualify for Champions League. Why would you want him at another club? So I think he's a mid-table coach, and I think Napoli didn't qualify because of Gattuso.
Oh, I think Napoli didn't qualify because they're just I never put Napoli up there from the beginning of the season. I just think there's too many holes that need to be filled in that squad. And Insigne really stepped up come back end of the season, and Gattuso, albeit he got sacked from AC Milan when he was performing quite well. He joined Napoli, and I've got to say, in the eyes of a management perspective, the question needs to be asked: is there any more he could have done with the team that he had? Now, if you put, say, for instance, Zidane in charge of Napoli, he's going to get more of the team out of the team than what Gattuso did, which is a fact. Players have certain respect for certain things, certain coaches. But I think the biggest shock that really eventuated would have been Roma not being in that top 4. Not top 4, sorry, not being in Europa, full stop. But, yeah, I think overall, if you were to call the results and the table at the start of the season, based off logic, based off last season, based off signings, you would have picked it, top 4, top 5, top 6, top 7, roughly. with some positions being filled. But that's how I see it.
Yeah, well, I did end up picking Lazio to come 6 and Roma to come 4. Roma do have a lot of they got a brand new owner, like we said before, and mid-season it's always very hard. Players don't know what's happening. Coaches don't know what's happening. They had big problems with Dzeko being frozen out of the team as well. He comes back in. He does make a difference. Roma just seem like that team where they're just not complete, and for them to get absolutely destroyed, by Manchester United in the second half. So it showed that they're capable in the first half. They were winning at half time and they just got absolutely destroyed and didn't turn up in that second half. So I think a lot's got to do with the mental side of what's going on there. And Lazio is very similar. Lazio just don't have the mental strength. They don't have the players on the bench to bring on to change a game. And I thought Roma were the same. I thought that if you want to talk about disappointing players, I thought that Mancini was actually probably one of the more disappointing players this year. Kambula was not what probably Roma expected, but he did have a few injuries, and the defense was very up and down as well for Roma. So I feel probably Roma in the end might have even been lucky to finish where they did finish with everything that went on during the season.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we will be doing another video with an AC Milan fan, Michael, who will have a great input into the player MVP, which we will cover through with him. But I think overall, looking at the table before we wrap it up, if we were to look at the table, is there, other than, and we've both highlighted Spezia, but other than that, did anything really shock and surprise? Or was it pretty much, if you were to, have a whiteboard at the start of the season with all the teams and you had to arrange the table, would you have gotten much wrong?
Well, when Juventus signed Pirlo, you got a brand new coach who's never coached a day in his life. He takes the Juventus job, and with the Super League being announced, and Juventus signed Weston McKennie there, an American, and I don't know if they signed both of those players because they were looking at playing in the Super League, and the Super League was supposed to take games to the US. So I don't know if they gave up even themselves on the Champions League because it didn't really matter. But I'm hoping that Pirlo gets to stay and that Juventus actually get a proper preseason, because for a new coach with a brand new midfield, I just feel like Juventus really had no chance at all. They virtually went in there, and Paul Pirlo's copped it so hard. He's won 2 cups, which is, I'm actually happy for him, being, not really being a Juventus supporter, but more for the coach himself, just, because he's an Italian legend. I'm happy for him that he won. I hope that long term he turns out to be a great coach, but I think that Juventus sort of threw him in the deep end, and not only that, his centre-backs in Bonucci and Chiellini barely played a game. They were injured pretty much the whole season. Dybala had COVID for months before the season even started, so he had no preseason. So they went in there super cold, and you could see that it just took Juventus a long, long time to find anything, to find any sort of rhythm. And a lot of the times it was up and down as well. They'd put in this brilliant performance and everyone be like, oh, yeah, that's how they want to play. And then the next week they'd come out and lose. It just seemed like a very up and down season. And, obviously COVID, because that preseason, with the games finishing 12 games short the last season, and then no supporters, there was a loss of money. Players, took a pay cut and all that. And I think the transfer market really hurt Juventus, probably more than any other team. When you look at that, it virtually cost them to get rid of Higuain. Matuidi, luckily they got rid of him as well. So I think if it wasn't a COVID season, I think Juventus would have been a lot more better. And I think they were the team that everyone was probably surprised that they were so poor. But when you put it all together, brand new coach, brand new midfield, starting the season without the Bala, Cellini, Bonucci weren't there the whole season virtually. I guess you got to understand why they finished in fourth spot. So if you're asking for a surprise, it probably was Juventus, but when you actually put it all together, it's understandable.
Yeah, no, I see exactly where you're coming from with that, and yeah, I think everyone was sort of on a very similar playing field in that respect. Where Juventus, they had the new coach, the shorter preseason, but then you look at Milan. Pioli wasn't meant to be there this season, and they only signed him back off the back end of how he performed it, but last season and how he wrapped it up. But overall, the transfer market was very rushed this year, and Inter made a lot of their moves very early, which was beneficial to them. But at the same time, there was no preseason, so when they announced we signed Hakimi and Damian, it was like, well, how are they going to play? We'll see in round one ended up being Fiorentina because Benevento was pushed back a week. So, every team sort of had every team, I think on the back end of it all, most teams were faced with a similar prospect of...
Well, I think Juventus copped it a lot more harder because I think Higuain was terrible for them because they copped a bigger loss, I think, Juventus. You're talking about a team that, that has a huge wage bill, and they were in the middle of just changing their team completely, where Inter had just completed their team. You know what I mean? So Inter were going in their second season with a brand new team, and realistically, I mean, they bring in Vidal and Kolarov, and they were just two of the worst signings ever. We can get into
that. I think the purpose of Kolarov was more for locker room support, more than anything. And
on the field anyway.
On the field, definitely. But that's definitely another video we're going to cover. Otherwise, we'll be here for hours. But yeah, I think overall, the one surprise from match day 1 to now would be Roma. I didn't expect them to be in the position they're in. And I did expect bigger things from them. They were unfortunate with the injury to Zaniolo. Kambula was always never seemed to be playing, or he was injured, or something here or there. They're probably my surprise positioning, just taking into account
that conference league that they're in. If you actually have a look at it, it kind of looks like they're teed up. Mourinho's teed up to play Tottenham in that final because Tottenham's actually in that tournament as well. So that's going to be great.
Yeah, and that'll be fantastic. But we will be bringing much more content. So like and subscribe and let us know what you want us to cover. I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Yeah. So we've still got we'll complete our MVPs with when Michael comes back, our midfield MVP. I'm pretty sure there might be a midfielder there from AC Milan that Michael might be hot about. So that'll be good. But yeah, like, subscribe, and we'll see you soon with our finish roundup.